Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Poetry Thursday. I want to do a shorter poem today, just to keep the video's length down. But I didn't want to skip Poetry Thursday. I like reading poetry to you. So today we're going to go to the Oxford Book of English Verse. This is the Helen Gardner edition, not the Quiller Couch edition. I love this poetry anthology a great deal, but it's only poems in English. And this is the poet that we're doing today is W.H. Davies, who's a Welsh poet, and who was famous in his own day for, I think, most of all, a memoir of his that was a story of a supertramp, not the great rock and roll band that gave us the iconic song Long Way Home, but rather the memoir of a vagrant, someone who rode the rails and was homeless. Although for most of his life, Davies was not homeless, and also for a long time, the end of his life, lived in a village in Gloucestershire that I know very well. I've been there many times, not only with crowds of dogs and not only co-opting Nailsmith's own dogs, but also to study its antiquities, to study a couple of buildings in particular, and to talk with all of the locals. I have to wonder, if you were to go to the local Nailsmith pub in Gloucestershire and ask the oldest person in the room, do you remember a time when a stranger came by and had a way with dogs, for instance? That'd probably be the thing that they'd remember. Had lots of dogs of his own and also had a way with your dog, who maybe wasn't friendly, but all of a sudden couldn't get enough of this stranger or something like that. I wonder if anybody there would remember. But one way or another, this author, in addition to writing that memoir, he wrote poetry for his whole life. And this poem is called The Inquest. And I'll read it to you now. I took my oath I would inquire, without affection, hate, or wrath, into the death of Ada Wright. So help me God, I took that oath. I went out to see the corpse, the 4 months babe that died so young. I judged it was 7 pounds in weight and little more than 1 foot long. One eye that had a yellow lid was shut, so was the mouth that smiled. The left eye open, shining bright, it seemed a knowing little child. For as I looked in that one eye, it seemed to laugh and say with glee, what caused my death you'll never know. Perhaps my mother murdered me. When I went into court again to hear the mother's evidence, it was a love child, she explained, and smiled for our intelligence. Now, gentlemen of the jury, said the coroner, this woman's child by misadventure met its death. Aye, said we. The mother smiled. And I could see that child's one eye, which seemed to laugh and say with glee, what caused my death you'll never know. Perhaps my mother murdered me. that is The Inquest, and as with all great poetry, it leaves out as much as it says. The narrator takes an oath to investigate the death of Ada Wright, this little girl, and it's clear that he thinks it was murder. Never mind this poetical fancy about what voice he hears from the dead child. He's pretty sure that it's foul play. We can infer that easily from the text, and yet when the narrative jumps, it jumps not to the rest of his investigation or to talking with anybody. It jumps not only to the inquest, the coroner's inquest, but to the verdict. Misadventure. Not murder by person or persons unknown, but misadventure. And the narrator agrees. Aye. He's one of the people who agrees to that. So there's a huge story bubbling underneath the details of this poem. Who is this narrator? And what suspicions did he have? And why couldn't he prove them? I love it. I just love how subversive it is. I also love, I have to admit, the voice of the child, who's not all that concerned with being dead and who's making a kind of a child's peekaboo game out of what caused the death in the first place. I think that brings a smile to my face every time I encounter this poem in this anthology and read it. I read a lot of other W.H. Davies, and I don't always enjoy his poetry. I mostly don't, but this one never fails to please. And it also struck, just by coincidence, a note. I read just recently the short story How Fear Left the Long Gallery by E.F. Benson, who wrote a lot of short stories, a lot of ghost short stories, and also wrote the Map and Lucia books. And How Fear Left the Long Gallery is a ghost story. And it's really good, and at the heart of the story is the ghosts of 2 little children, 2 twins, who are brutally murdered when they're scarce able to walk, and who therefore haunt the long gallery of a particular house And the stories, all of E.F. Benson's stories are wonderful. Everything the author wrote is wonderful. But that was on my mind because I was reading this and naturally reading childish ghosts into it. There is no ghost. There is no supernatural in this poem. But it lurks at the edges. And I love that feeling. Just love it. So that's going to be, sorry for the brevity of the video, but that's going to be our poem for today. I didn't want to let a Poetry Thursday go away. I'm halfway tempted. I'm having so much fun doing this to read you a poem every day. I really am. To read you a poem every day and talk about it. I think the original idea of Poetry Thursday was a kind of a joking contest to get everybody to pull poetry off their shelves and read it and talk about it. But it hasn't seemed to me that a lot of people want to do that. I love it. I absolutely love it. And there's so much out there. Short and long. There's so much out there. I'm tempted. I'm tempted to read you a poem every day, just as a way of saying hello. But one way or another, I'm going to wrap this up and lay back down. So I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.